talks about E&C program effectiveness, but what does that really mean in practice, particularly if regulators evaluate your program? I'm Susan Frank-Divers with Athena, and my guest is Andrew McBride, founder and CEO of Integrity Bridge, former Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer of Albemarle Corporation. In that role, Andrew shepherded Albemarle through DOJ and SEC FCPA investigations, ultimately resolved by non-prosecution agreements and a cease and desist. And then the program went on under his tutelage to win the Compliance Week 2024 Program of the Year. Andrew, that's quite a journey. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much, Susan. Pleasure to be here.
As you know, I think we start out with 3 rapid-fire statements, and I know this is hard for lawyers, but you can only say yes, no, or maybe, and then a 1-sentence hot take. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. In your view, is there a significant gap between regulators' expectations and the way many, if not most, ethics and compliance programs are structured and run today?
Yes, there is a gap. And my hot take is that there is much focus on the ethics and compliance program and not as much focus on related business processes.
I look forward to discussing that. Second, are you a fan of static snapshot compliance risk assessments?
No. So the DOJ has specifically called out against snapshot risk assessments, and I'm hugely supportive of that position.
Third, are most of the ethics and compliance programs you review using the right metrics to measure the effectiveness of the program?
I would say no. The challenge with current metrics is that they focus on effort or execution of that element of the program.
So let's dive into that. The first point was that what I heard you say is that ethics and compliance programs that aren't deeply integrated into their organization's business really limit their impact and their proactivity. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I think that getting a good understanding of other functions processes really helps you become a better ethics and compliance professional. And in my experience, other functions, the SMEs there, they really love talking about what they're doing. And so you're kind of pushing on an open door. And because what we do as ethics compliance professionals, we do governance, we do training, we do communications. We have a lot of value to bring to those other functions. And so there's kind of like a two-way benefit going on. The more time that you can spend understanding those other business processes, so accounts payable, inquire to cash, delegations of authority, travel and expenses, what that enables you to do is understand where risks can arise in those processes and also where controls, ethics and compliance controls can be inserted into those processes, and then how to make the ethics and compliance program and the business process more integrated so it just feels like part of doing regular business. The other thing is that the closer you get to those functions, you're then able to spot unique risks. And I'm going to give an example from Albemarle. So there was a time several years ago when lithium was it was a hot commodity. It was in high demand. There was a shortage of it. And so that meant was that there were customers kind of calling out for more lithium, and they were approaching our sales team, almost begging and pleading for them to supply lithium. And so we identified a risk of gifts and hospitality being offered by customers to our sales team, not the other way around. So we were then able to manage that risk through the appropriate training and communications.
That's a great example of being integrated enough into the business that you're able to spot an actual risk as it arises and address it.
Right.
And that's a logical lead into the next big topic, which is, and I think it's one where there's a fair amount of angst and confusion in the E&C community, and that's what's the best way to approach compliance risk management and risk assessment?
Yes, so the traditional approach, as we said at the outset, is to do that snapshot compliance risk assessment, maybe once a year or every 2 years, and maybe it's supported by lengthy legal memos. The challenge
Always,
I
always. You have to
always
have the
legal
lengthy
memos,
legal
the lengthy,
memos.
yeah, and I mean, that's not to say that that legal assessment is needed from a jurisdictional point of view to assess the magnitude of the risk. But ultimately, that assessment of compliance risk has to be then framed against all the other risks within a company as part of a company's enterprise risk management framework. And so, whether it's the responsibility of compliance or colleagues in risk or another department, that ERM framework helps do that calibration across multiple areas of risk, including health, safety, environment, as well as compliance. And the art there is in the precision of how you're defining your risk events. And so, taking your lengthy kind of compliance risk assessment memos that you may have got, then converting that into those precise articulations of the risk event, the scenarios where those risk events will happen, and then assessing those risks by reference to magnitude and likelihood. That enables management and the board to then compare that compliance risk with other types of risk, which then frames how much resource is allocated to managing those different risks. Also, if you're defining those risks in that precise way, it helps you then clearly articulate the controls that are going to manage those risks, whether controls for one particular risk or controls that serve to manage multiple risks. That articulation of the risk event is absolutely key.
And I can see that that really depends on being integrated into the business and not simply seeing compliance as the organization that does training and investigations. That's a very
Yes.
dynamic model. And that leads us to the last topic, which is talk to us about data analytics. I mean, it's been a big thing for the last 10 years, ever since it came out in the DOJ guidance. But I think, again, it's one of those topics where everybody talks about it, but it means different things. So, how does
Mm.
that fit with the risk assessment process? And what's the best way to approach it?
Yeah, so I love data. I just think that data illuminates your ethics and compliance program. And really it feels, if we go back to that discussion around periodic snapshot risk assessments, don't get me wrong, there's always the time and the place for a workshop or a survey, but having data kind of support that, and continuous data, it gives you more of a real-time insight into what your risk profile is. And then if you break it down into the different types of risk, how can data support that? So firstly, inherent risk. Your inherent risk is really about what the total potential size of the risk is to the company. So I'm going to take forced labor as an example. If you have a good understanding of how much raw material you purchase that has sensitivity or exposure to forced labor risk, then at least you get a handle on, is this such a risk that we need to allocate some resources to build a program to wrap around? Then you get to actual risk. Your actual risk of there being conduct that is illegal or otherwise in contravention of your company's core values. That's where things like transaction monitoring, where you're looking for irregular payments to vendors, perhaps to government officials, you're actually identifying potential fraud or corruption right there using that data analytics. And it also extends to things like communications monitoring. That's a really important aspect of a program, say from an antitrust perspective, where the currency of the crime is the sharing of information around collusion in the markets, which is best picked up in the communications. And then finally, residual risk. Let's assume that you've applied your compliance program controls to a particular activity. That notwithstanding, is there still risk that you need to be aware of and management need to be aware of? And I'll go back again to my time at my last company. If I think about the way in which we conducted due diligence on third-party sales representatives, agents, and distributors, we put them through a robust due diligence process. And at the end, they still got scored low, medium, and high. Because we did that categorization, we were then able to take a snapshot every month of what our aggregate risk profile was, and then track that over time. And what we were able to show to the board was that on our sales intermediaries, because we had terminated agents, because we had de-risked some of those agents with additional controls, our trend profile was going down. However, on our vendors, because we were doing a lot of construction projects with permitting, needing consultants to help with that, even though we had the controls in place, those vendors were in high risk jurisdictions. We could show that over time our risk profile was going up. That information about residual risk is enormously valuable in just having an informed discussion with management and the board that yes, we've got the controls in place, we're managing the risk, but we still need to be vigilant.
That's a fabulous example because it shows that you can have the theoretical structure in place to vet agents and to have the right terms and conditions. But if you don't really look at it from a dynamic risk perspective, what's going on in that country or what's going on in that business, then you don't have that informed point of view, which allows you to
Yes.
say, this is on the rise, and it's not through lack of controls or a lack of a good program. It's simply the way business is being done.
That's right. Absolutely.
Well, Andrew, this has been a wonderful and illuminating conversation on tough topics. So thank you very much for joining us. And I hope you'll come back and talk more about risk in the near future.
I would love to, Susan. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Andrew.